Cool. Hey everyone, welcome to the Growth Chat by Mailmodo. I'm Mansi, your host for the evening, and I'm a part of the marketing team at Mailmodo. Mailmodo is an email marketing software that helps you make emails interactive by adding forms, widgets, shopping carts inside your emails. Today we have Ekaterina Harvard with us to talk about why customer research is so important for startups and how to really go about it. Thanks for joining us today, Katrina. We are really glad to have you here. Before we start, people who are watching it, please feel free to drop in your questions in the comment section for us to answer. We'll take those in the last 15 minutes of the session. Yeah, so let's get started. We're really glad to have you here, Katrina. Can we, quickly start with, a quick intro to your professional journey as a conversion copywriter? Over to you.
Yes, sure. Thank you for having me. So, I work with B2B SaaS startups that are getting ready to grow and that need to ramp up their growth with the power of customer research and conversion copy.
Right, amazing. Cool. So let's start with the first question that I have for you. So, do startups really need to do customer research, especially when they are trying to move so fast? And why do they really need to do it?
All right, so I know that a lot of times moving fast trumps the research because it feels like it's slowing you down, and the idea of having to spend 2 weeks talking to customers and then figure out a way to turn the qualitative insights into copy is like, we cannot afford to waste time on that. But the way I think about it is nailing your messaging and knowing what to say and how to say it, not just on your website, but in your paid traffic funnels, means that you can move faster without having to slow down when something breaks along the way. For example, you realize that your ads are not converting or your website has a ridiculously high bounce rate. So, the reason I think that everybody, especially startups, needs to do some customer research is that this means that your copy is going to be based on the research findings instead of your assumptions. And on top of that, you'll be able to create memorable and sticky copy instead of going with the bland and generic, the future of X, which sometimes happens when you do your own copy that is just based on the way you see your startup and not on what your ideal customers think about it.
Right, that makes total sense that, it's important to understand first what the customers would really want, and then, because it's not always the same as what you think and what the customer
Yes.
will be thinking, right? It's not going to be the same. Yeah. Cool. So, is running customer research for copy and messaging optimization for your website different from other types of customer research?
Yes, it is. So the main difference is that at this point, you already know who your market is. You're not trying to validate the product idea. Ideal case scenario, you found your product market fit, you know who your ICPs are. Now the question is, how can I talk to them in a way that will convert them faster and easier? So this is a very different problem from like market research to determine the size of your market, the main problem you're trying to solve. We're going really deep into finding the best messages. And so that involves more qualitative data and more listening to your customers to focus on the, yes, I'm going to say the words part instead of the high level research.
Right, yeah, it's more focused, of course, that makes sense. So, now we have kind of developed this understanding of why to do research and how to go about it. I mean, why should we go and do customer research? So moving on to understanding what is really required? What do you need to have in place to run customer research successfully? Are there any prerequisites to it? Like, firstly, how do you decide the mode of research? Would it be interviews, forms? What works best? And when, like, how frequently, and stuff like that. So, how do you
Mhm.
decide that?
Ooh, so many great questions. So, well, let's start with what it takes to run customer research to develop your best messages and your best copy. I'm going to say that the most important thing is to be very clear about the problem you're trying to solve. So, talk to your customers sounds very fluffy and like, yeah, you just jump on a Zoom call and then suddenly you have all of those magic insights that will like 10x your growth. That's not how it works out, unfortunately. So I would say that before you do anything else, you need to be very clear on what it is that you are trying to find out. So, some examples: you're planning to launch some paid ads and you want to be very clear on how to convert the most of your traffic. Or you realize that your website is not performing as well as you were hoping it would. So people come to your homepage, maybe get past the hero section and then bounce off. That's a problem and you want to solve it. Or, for example, your nurturing sequence or your onboarding email sequence is not translating into free to paid conversions. Again, this is a very specific problem that you can solve with the power of research. But if you don't have a specific problem, then you don't know which questions to ask, which means that you're going to waste a lot of time only to realize that you do not have the answers you need. So once you identify the problem you are trying to solve, the next step is to have a system. Like, I'm a big systems geek because a lot of times people run research and then they get to the point when they need to analyze all of that qualitative data. That becomes very overwhelming. And then it's not clear how to translate this into copy. So that can be painful. And again, that's probably one of the reasons why it feels like such a complete waste of time, which it really shouldn't be. So I would say that before you decide on the type of research you're going to run, you need to be clear on first what it is that you're hoping to achieve, and second, on what it is that you need to figure out. So, do you have a hypothesis? Do you think you know what's wrong with your homepage? Do you think you know why your ad funnels are underperforming? If yes, good. Now you need to ask some questions to figure out whether or not you're right. And this is when you develop interview guides or develop a survey and then move forward with executing. So far, so good?
Yeah, it sounds good. And yeah, of course, like to just summarize what you said, I think it's about defining your problem statement very clearly, to know what is the problem and what you're actually trying to solve. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Cool. So coming, so after that, how do you really decide what to ask? You know, I mean, of course your objectives are very clear now that you are ready to kind of go forward, but what are some of the important questions that you think are really important for any startup to ask their customers uh, during the research? What are some of the questions that you think you shouldn't miss at all? you know
Sure. So it is true that depending on the problem you're solving, the questions will can be really different. But at the very high level, before you start developing pretty much anything, ideal case scenario, first what triggers the need to purchase your product. So a question to explore that would be what was happening in your life that brought you to look for information about your product category. Then ideally you have some understanding of how your ideal customers describe this problem that they're trying to solve. Because this is how you attract their attention, or rather, attract attention of the prospects that maybe don't know about your product yet, but they definitely know they have this very problem. Then, another thing that I think every startup should explore is the outcomes that ICPs were able to achieve. And I know like the holy grail is to have the numbers, the return on investment, like very impressive growth results or whatever else it may be. But another thing that is important to document and to use is the emotions. Even if you are in B2B, your buyers have feelings too. And those feelings are also a purchasing decision driver. So is it relief? Is it joy? Is it freedom? You will find out if you talk to your customers and or send out surveys to explore this.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, the point that you made, about the emotions and understanding. I mean, of course, everybody's human, and to uh, uh, see that side of it, rather than just going about it from a very transactional point of view. I think that's very important. Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. Uh, right. So, what once you've like decided all the questions, how does one, what process do you follow to conduct this research after defining the problem statement and having those questions ready? Are there any sort of rules, set of rules that you follow to, go ahead with the research?
Yes, sure. So for startups, time is of essence, right? Everybody wants to move fast. So in many cases, yes, you could do surveys and then interviews and then user sessions, but realistically, sometimes you just don't have the time. So I think the most important step is you have the problem you're trying to solve. What is the minimum viable way of just figuring it out now and then moving faster once you do it? In some cases, for example, if you're doing a website update, the easiest way to go forward is to run a messaging panel or to run some user sessions and then see how people interact with your website before you go live. This way, you can launch more confidently because you've figured out what the possible hiccups in the flow are and why people might be dropping off and address them before you launch the updated website. So, this is ideal, and this can take less than 2 weeks if you are being very productive and focused. Like if you have like 10 other growth initiatives you're dealing with at the same time, it might take a little longer, but it doesn't have to. But if you have more ambitious growth projects where you really need to work on different, multiple types of collateral, then it might make sense to move a little slower and schedule some customer interviews so that you have that research to rely on to inform like those multiple pieces of collateral at once. Sometimes, if you have enough customers, you can be ambitious and send out a survey to all of them and then use this as a pre screening, so to speak, so that you can identify the people who are really motivated, interested, and leave detailed answers. So, those are the people you will want to follow up with to go in depth and run those customer interviews. Because surveys are amazing, but they can go wrong if you forget to ask why. So, my favorite example is sending out NPS surveys. Well, yes, you will get that net promoter score. Yes, you can track it over time. But did you ask your customers why they gave you that score? If you didn't, you're missing an opportunity to find out more. and to figure out what it is exactly that you need to improve. Without it, NPS is just a vanity metric, and I could go on about this for hours. It's my least favorite type of survey, to be honest. But going back to longer surveys, so for example, if you're working on your website messaging, on your messaging overall, you could use the survey to figure out of all the options that you think are viable, what is your customers think is the most important. And then if you're running interviews, you can ask them why. And knowing this why will give you their pain points, the outcomes that they achieve with the help of your product, and also the background information that you can use for your social media, for your content, for your ad funnels, and for your landing pages. Because as long as it follows the problem agitation solution formula, you need ideally voice of customer research to fill those out, to make them memorable and sticky, and to get your prospects to convert.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, as you said, even though startups are moving really fast, I think we need to do this because this solves so many of your problems. As you said, you can share content on your social media based on your research, and you can have content for your website and all across. So it's very important, I think, even if you're trying to run really fast, you have like a crunch of time, but still, I think. Asking why is really important for startups. That makes total sense. Right. So how do you really decide the sample size of the research for the research?
Well, the more the merrier. Okay, that's not true. That will get overwhelming super fast. So, if we're talking about customer interviews, I would say 5 to 7 per ICP, and 7 is already like you will get so much out of those. If you can only run 5, run 5. If you can only run 3, run 3. Because well, it's not true. Not any kind of data is better than no data. But with customer interviews, most likely you will get the information that will be super useful, even if it's just 3 or 5 interviews. With surveys, you can go bigger, but if you have a lot of open-ended questions, you're the one who'll be stuck analyzing them. So you want to be careful about this and balance the number of respondents with the speed that you want to be able to achieve. Because if you get 50 responses, you are the one who'll have to tag them and code them in the end. So that will slow you down. Not to mention use them to update the copy. If you do have so many customers, I would suggest segmenting your list and only reaching out to the people who are either your best customers or perfectly fit the ideal customer profile that you want to write for. This way, you have less noise, you have less data to analyze, and you can rely on the responses that you get because you did the work before sending out the survey.
Right. And as you said, having open-ended questions in the survey. I mean, of course, that's why customer research becomes, really important. I mean, asking, doing interviews with your customers becomes really important because in survey forms, it's like there are open-ended questions, and then, people don't really prefer answering those. So yeah, and great. So how do you go about collecting insights and making sense of out of the information that you've received after the customer research?
Oh, it's the best part, in my opinion. Some people do not agree, but you made an excellent point. Open ended questions are only as good as the responses that you get. So, and with surveys, you do not have the option to follow up. If your respondent leaves a sentence. That's it. That's all you get. You cannot keep nudging them to tell you more. So that's another drawback of running a survey without following it up with interviews. But assuming you got the qualitative data that you wanted, either out of surveys or out of interviews, the next step is to make sense of it. So the first step that I take is to just sort it in a spreadsheet. If you don't like spreadsheets, by all means, don't use them. There are products out there that will help you tag your, for example, interview responses. So a tool I used was UserBid, but there are many others. So the whole point is that you can categorize the responses based on what you're hearing. If you're looking for pain points, then you need to start breaking down different types of pain points across a spreadsheet or across whatever tagging system you use. If you're looking for outcomes, again, you're sorting through all of the types of outcomes you get. If you have closed questions, good for you. There is no sorting. You just need to see the results and then use them. But with customer interviews, there's always something new and different. So I would suggest also having a separate tab in your spreadsheet to document things that you didn't expect to hear, but that came back nevertheless. And now the next step, once you have all of this sorted out, is to start answering your initial question. So maybe you are trying to figure out what your messaging should be. That's a high level question, so you don't need to pull out voice of customer quotes. You're just figuring out what it is you should be saying on a very high level. If you are working on improving your web pages, or if you're looking for ideas for your paid traffic funnels, this is when you finally, in my case, get to go very deep into what it is that people are saying specifically. How are they describing their problems? How are they describing your solution? What are the feelings that they're feeling once they are finally solving that problem with your product? And most importantly, how do they get from I have a problem to this product has solved it for me? Oh,
Yeah.
a shortcut. There is one shortcut. You could use word clouds. I don't. I prefer to just break things down and then count mentions by a topic or by a specific pain point. But you could just do this quick and dirty. I dump everything into a word cloud tool and then I get back the most frequently repeated phrases back.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, Shortcut always works, right? Sure. So, how do these insights really help customers in improving their website? I mean, how does it help startups to improving their website and website copy and messaging? How do these insights really help? Uh,
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest parts, right? Sometimes it's super hard to connect your huge spreadsheet full of voice of customer data and full of things that your customers are saying or your prospects are saying, and then translate it into a website page or a funnel. And sometimes this can feel really painful because that's a very new way of writing copy, especially if all of your startup copy was based on your vision, on your own understanding of which features matter and why. So this is kind of breaking your own pattern of writing about your product. So this can be unpleasant at first. But fortunately, you have a system that you can follow. So you know which questions you were asking early on. You know which hypothesis you had. So, for example, I think that the main benefit that my customers get out of using the product is saving time. So, time savings. Then you go run your survey, you go talk to your customers, and you find out, well, either you find out that you are wrong, which is not fun, but at least you know it now. And you know what it is that your customers think specifically because you ask them. Or you find out that you were right. So good for you. No changes to be made. You can just move on down the page and figure out what else you can do. And some examples of things you can do is use those very memorable phrases that came up during interviews, or those descriptions of emotions, or those descriptions of outcomes, and use this copy instead of your generic kind of placeholdery headlines or calls to action or any other elements on your page that could do with a little extra conversion fuel.
I think, this also gives you a very user-generated content, that startups try to use. I mean, it's obviously very helpful, and yeah, I mean, you don't really have to work hard on, to come up
Yeah.
with, yeah, it's very user-generated. So I think, yeah, it's beautiful. Great. So I think it's going very good so far. We're really having fun and getting a lot of insights from you. So just a little bit for the people watching it, please feel free to drop in comments and ask questions. We'll take it from there. Okay, so moving on, what do you think are the biggest mistakes that startups make when conducting customer research? And how do you how should we really avoid it?
All right. Kind of breaking the mold a bit here, but I think that the biggest mistake is not doing the research. Like, I understand why this happens, and I understand that startups need to move fast, but really, not having those like very basic insights will slow you down in the end. So it doesn't have to be extensive. It doesn't have to be time consuming, but by doing the research, you are making it so much easier to grow. Now, in terms of mistakes that startups make while running the research, I would say not having systems in place. So I know so many startups that talk to their customers, competitors, partners all the time, but all of the information is inside their heads. So if you are not a founder, you have no access to it. And most importantly, you don't have a record of what customers are saying. Now, in terms of conversion copy, this is a big no no because we rely on the voice of customer. And of course, you can find ways to work around this by reading reviews or looking at competitors' testimonials if all else fails. But having systems to document those conversations and to make them accessible to everybody on the team is really crucial for finding the messages that will resonate with your prospects. So yeah, that's the most painful one.
Right, right. Great. So, and okay, what do you think is the best time, for a startup to conduct research, or how often should they conduct customer interviews and customer research?
That's a good question. Ideal case scenario, this is an ongoing effort. But let's be real, this doesn't always happen. So you can build in feedback loops. And actually, I wrote a post about doing this in a very like MVP-ish way. But if you're not doing that, there are specific times when you really, really need to slow down and talk to your customers. Some examples. You realize you have found your product market fit before you start growing and really ramping up your paid traffic efforts. talk to your customers. You have identified your ICPs, and you know that these are the types of personas you're going after. Talk to them. You'll be happy you did, because that will make your sales outreach just so much easier. Now, you're getting ready to scale your outbound efforts. Same thing. Paid traffic. Also, before you start mapping out your paid traffic funnel, do you have all of the information you need to make it work? Even something as basic as reading customer reviews allowed us to triple the conversions compared to an industry standard for one of my clients. So it doesn't have to be a huge thing, but slow down and do something. And then finally, things like updating your website copy. If you're doing this, you might as well talk to your customers and find those really memorable sticky headlines that will help you keep your prospects on the page. Or, for example, if you're starting to invest into building your organic reach, talk to your customers, figure out what they read, what they need to find out before they're ready to convert, and what are the topics that they are constantly tracking and following. The answers are all there. You just need to ask. So for me, that's a no-brainer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. Um, I mean, it's like required at almost every part of the funnel. When you are going through the funnel, it's like you need to uh, talk to customers in every stage of the funnel they are in.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. We have come towards the end of this session. Just one last question that I have for you is that like what tools do you use for different stages of the research? The one I think you mentioned was Userbit. Uh, Probably you can tell something more about it, and you can mention any other tools that you think people should startups should consider while conducting customer research.
Yes. So before I go down that rabbit hole, you don't really have to invest a lot into those tools, although you can if you want to. But honestly, it can be something as simple as setting up a type form or a Google form survey or just recording your Zoom conversations and transcribing them. So it doesn't have to be this big, extensive search for the best user research survey. But this is what I use. To run interviews, Zoom plus Otter. I've tried Fireflies. I don't really like the way Fireflies transcribes, although they do have some other excellent features. But I'm sticking with Otter. Surveys, Typeform, just because I find that it's easier to get people to answer longer questions if they're having a good user experience. So Typeform does that. And it also enables, well, Google Forms also make it possible to use jump links. So the main goal is to just make it easy, pleasant, and reasonably quick to leave their responses. So Typeform would do it for you. Now, in terms of figuring out which questions to ask, that's a very important step. And I know that some startups don't really invest time into setting up their internal analytic tools. But if you have a website, you might as well set up your conversion goals in Google Analytics and set up your tracking, and also install Hotjar or a similar tool that will allow you to first see what's going on during session recordings. So how are people actually interacting with your website? And two, see the heat maps so that you're not guessing how far they get down the page before they bounce. Now, having at least those tools installed means that as far as website copy is concerned, you can form much better hypotheses and you're not wasting time chasing information that will turn out to be irrelevant. Now, if If you like the idea of customer research, but need to really move fast or have a web page that you just don't know where to start the optimization process, something that can help is using one of the services that allow you to gather feedback about your web page. So it could be user testing or it could be Winter. I like Winter for B2B because you can control which questions you ask, and also you can be really granular in terms of which audience you're talking to. So you don't have to sort through responses that are just irrelevant because they're not your ICP, which is nice and saves time.
No, I think you laid out a bunch of tools that I think are really going to be helpful for people. That's great. Cool. So we have one question uh, from Gloria. How important is customer research for sales?
I think it is super important because, I mean, sales are in this very fortunate position. They talk to prospects, ideal case scenario, when we get to that point. So there are ways to document that knowledge and figure out what's missing from the current sales pitch. But sometimes your prospects are not really willing to tell you everything about their pain points. I just saw I just saw somebody post an image on LinkedIn yesterday with this pop-up survey saying, "Please share your objections so that we can overcome them." In real life, you don't get people to kind of willingly share all of their reservations with you. So, customer research is a sneaky way to work around this, even if your demo participants or just prospects on sales calls are not giving you that information. So, when somebody converts, you can follow up and ask them about their journey from a prospect to a customer. Specifically, you can ask, were there any hesitations or reservations that you had prior to your purchase or prior to signing up? And if yes, what were they? And then, even more importantly, what helped them overcome those hesitations? Was it the sales deck? Was it the demo? Was it case studies? Having that information available will make your sales process run faster and smoother because now you know what to say when and which collateral to use for your next sales call.
I think that was quite elaborate, and yeah, it was great. Yeah, it makes sense of how from different points, from the point where you are trying to get a prospect, from the point of person being a prospect to a customer. Throughout that, you can really have questions for them, and yeah. Next question we have, how do we convince customers for a meeting for research? Do we try incentives or just good bond with them?
Good question. I would say it depends. So sometimes you have, and especially for startups, I don't think this has ever been a problem in my experience. There's always those biggest fans, customers who really, really want to talk to you and are happy to share their experience. Now, sometimes those are not the people you want to talk to. Sometimes you have, for example, disengaged users or maybe even recently churned users, God forbid, or maybe demo participants that did not share the reasons why they decided not to purchase your product. In those cases, yes, it makes sense to have incentives. If you're not sure if you're not sure just how many people are likely to reach out, I would suggest, again, segmenting your list. Well, first figuring out who it is you want to talk to and why, And second, first trying just an outreach to maybe 10 to 20 people to see if they respond. If you realize that they're too busy, that they just don't have time, or they're not interested, then you can try sending requests with incentives to this new batch of users or other target audience members.
Right. Great. So next question we have from Anis Manshi. Once you get your users to book a user call, what steps do you take to ensure that they turn up? Okay, I think this is more to.
Oh, no shows are painful. I hear you. Um, so, the first step is to manage expectations. So, it is much likelier that people will show up if they know what to expect. And it also helps you get more people to sign up. So, when when people sign up, they should get a confirmation email. And if you're using a scheduler like Calendly, this should be very easy to set up. So a confirmation email explaining what to expect, when the call is taking place, how long, and your goals. Because very often people don't show up because they just feel like it's either going to be a waste of their time or if they feel like it's not very important to you or to them. So, showing appreciation early on helps, as well as managing expectations early on. And then I would also recommend setting up a series of reminder emails. Like, you don't have to go overboard and email them like every day until they show up. But let's say one day before the call and then 30 minutes before the call should should help you get more of those signups show up for the call.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Cool. So I think I think we can wrap up here. It was amazing. It was great talking to you. I think we got a lot of insights on customer research and the tools to use, the questions to ask, and the whole process to set up. Um, okay, I think there's two more questions. Sorry, I'll
Oh,
just.
no worries. Go ahead.
Can customer research be about prospects or just customers?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely can be about prospects. Now, the problem with trying to get your prospects to talk to you is that they're just not interested sometimes. So, there are different ways to go about this. One is using a service like Winter or using user research sessions to figure out just what it is that customers need to know about you and your product to sign up. Or you can reverse engineer your customer's journey by talking. I'm sorry, reverse engineer your prospect's journey by talking to your customers. Now, here it's very important to realize that those responses will be biased if you're only talking to people who converted. So if you do have access to prospects that engaged with your startup but then did not convert, then I would strongly recommend following up with them. And this is where surveys are actually better than interviews. Because I find that a lot of times people are trying to be nice and then they're not really willing to share all of the reasons they're not signing up. But having a survey, once it's clear that they're not converting, pop up in their inbox makes it just a little bit easier to share the reasons that they did not convert. Because it also feels like it feels less personal, and you can also be very explicit about your expectations and use language like We're not trying to get you back. We're not going to use this to sell at you again, but we would really love to get your honest feedback or your candid feedback, whichever verbiage you prefer, so that we can improve our product. And it might seem like a long shot, but in my experience, a lot of people are willing to take 2 to 3 minutes of their time and share the reasons they did not convert.
I'll just add one more thing here. Like if you think they are hesitant to, they'll be hesitant to really reply to that also or respond to that. I think even like giving them probably options, like hey, just select out of these four options which one is the reason that you are not, or
Mm-hmm.
probably coming on the call or things like that, or probably have a poll or a form inside email where you just ask them to select an answer, and that won't take a lot of time from them. So I think, yeah, I think that can also help.
Yeah, that's definitely an option if you already have some ideas of what makes people decide not to convert. But if you go with a closed question, make sure you have other option available because sometimes you cannot foresee all of the possible answers, and having the other option gives you an opportunity to learn even more about your prospects.
Of course. That's true. Yeah. Great. So next question we have from Manalisha Thakur. What are the primal steps towards creating user research compilation?
Interesting. I wonder, like, I can take a guess at what this means, but if you're still with us, please share your definition of what user research compilation is. So I'm going to guess that we're talking about like a research database where all of the research is stored for reference. And honestly, the first step is probably getting a buy in because this is a huge undertaking. And you will need to engage your sales team, your product team, and of course, your marketing team to make sure that all of that information is accessible to everyone. So once you have that buy in, it'll probably, I would say, deciding where to store that information is going to be very important because Google Drive is nice as a starting point, but eventually you will just have this huge repository of stuff that is not searchable and where people will be getting lost all the time. There are tools created specifically for the purpose of making customer and user research accessible to everyone. So then researching them and deciding which one is the best tool for your company is the next step. And after that, making sure that everybody knows where to send their information, how to store it so that everybody else can find it, and also deciding what are the things that you are collecting all the time, like having those feedback loops in place, and which customer insights you are going to gather, say, once every 6 months. And then you should be good to go. I hope this answers your question.
So yeah, I think she has a follow-up question here.
Mhm.
So as for you, which users should we talk to first? Is it the resurrected users or active users?
What's the problem you're trying to solve? If your biggest problem is churn, that's one case. If you need more MQLs in your pipeline, that's a very different question. So it depends. The worst answer ever.
Yeah, yeah, that depends. Right. I think we don't have any more questions, and I hope Manalisha that answered your question. If it didn't, Okay, the aim is retention. That's what she said. Yeah.
Retention. Okay. If
We
your
have another
biggest
question.
challenge is, oh, okay. Well, I
Sorry.
will talk about the retention first and then I'll answer the
Yeah,
next one.
sure,
Okay.
sure. Sorry.
Okay. So if retention is your biggest challenge at the moment, I would set up a survey first so that you can keep gathering feedback from your churned users as they churn. And second, I would reach out to the past users for the last up to 3 months, depending on how many you need or how many you have, and send out a survey first, just because they're not likely to be very keen to sign up for interviews, right? And then try to get some understanding of what happened. If you run the survey and if you're still not clear like what it is that's happening, then probably incentivizing some of those churned customers to give you 25, 30 minutes of your time would be the next step. And also I would in parallel I would also try and look at the trends, like what is happening before they churn. Can you find out how their usage changed, or if there's a specific user profile that churns more, and then see if that will inform your questions for the survey.
All right. So next question we have from Nupur Mittal. Is there a way to judge the efficacy of customer research?
Tell me more. All right, so um, I'm going to make a wild assumption that we're talking about return on investment here, because with conversion copy, like you just measure conversions before and after. So you could publish a landing page that is just founder generated or marketing generated without running the research. See what happens. And if you believe you could get better results, you could run some customer research or some messaging panels and then see what happens once you improve and optimize your copy.
I hope that helps. Um, Great. So we can check for another minute if we are having any questions, and then probably wrap up. Cool. So I think we are uh, done here, and we don't have any more questions. Cool. So it was really good, talking to you, and great insights from this conversation, and I'm sure it'll help us also to, drive customer research and customer interviews in the future. Definitely. Great. Thanks, Katrina, for joining us. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. It was great having you. Thank you for the questions. And yeah, please stay tuned for our next session, which will be coming up soon. Uh, Thanks again, Katrina. Do you have anything to say or tell the audience here?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat. If you have a question, a follow up question, or are confused by what it takes to go from we did the research and now we need to turn it into copy, you can you're very welcome to follow up via email or just find me on LinkedIn, and I'll try to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you for that, Katrina. Let's just we'll catch up with you again, and it was great talking to you. Thank you. Bye bye.
All right, thank you.